I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy blue dress for what felt like the 20th time. My stomach was in knots, the same way it always was before seeing Richard's family. 7 years of marriage, and I still felt like an unwelcome guest whenever we visited his childhood home in Wellesley. "Emma, we're going to be late," Richard called from downstairs. His voice carried that familiar edge of impatience. "Mom hates it when people aren't punctual." I know, I muttered, grabbing my small clutch from the counter. Heaven forbid. We upset Margaret Blackwell. I took one final deep breath and headed downstairs, where Richard was already holding the car keys, his foot tapping against our hardwood floor. He looked handsome in his button-down shirt and slacks, clothes he only wore when visiting his mother. For work at the accounting firm, he dressed more casually. For Margaret, nothing but the best. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek, as I reached the bottom step. His compliment felt genuine, at least. "It's just dinner, Emma. A few hours, and then we'll be back home watching that British baking show you love." I nodded, forcing a smile. Just dinner. But we both knew it was never just dinner with the Blackwells. Every gathering was an evaluation, an assessment of whether I was worthy of their precious son. I'd been found lacking since our first meeting, the Boston University English professor's daughter who'd chosen to work at a small tech startup rather than pursue something more substantial. Never mind that I'd built that startup from the ground up with my college roommate, Kate. Never mind that I was good at what I did. To them, I was simply the woman who'd stolen Richard away from their grand plans. The drive to Wellesley took 40 minutes, each mile adding another layer of tension to my shoulders. Richard turned up the radio, humming along to classic rock songs, as if we were headed to a friend's barbecue, instead of what would inevitably be an evening of subtle barbs and condescension. Margaret's house, or estate, as she preferred to call it, sat behind an ornate iron gate at the end of a long winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. The massive colonial had been in the Blackwell family for 3 generations, a constant reminder of their old Boston money and social standing. "Remember, just smile and be yourself," Richard said as we pulled up to the front door, where several luxury cars were already parked. Be myself? That was precisely what Margaret hated most. The door swung open before we could even ring the bell. There stood Margaret Blackwell in all her glory. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, strand of pearls around her neck, and a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored black pants. At 68, she still carried herself with the poise of the debutante she'd once been. "Richard, darling," she exclaimed, pulling him into an embrace that somehow managed to look both affectionate and rehearsed. Right on time. Her gaze shifted to me, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "Emma, that's certainly an interesting dress choice." And so it began. "Hello, Mrs. Blackwell," I replied, my voice steady despite the immediate critique. "Thank you for inviting us." "Margaret, please," she corrected, though we both knew I'd never be allowed the intimacy of using her first name without the reminder. "Everyone's in the sitting room. Richard, your father was just discussing the Williams account. I'm sure he'd appreciate your input." As if on cue, Richard's face lit up at the mention of his father's investment firm, where he'd worked before, deciding to branch out on his own, a decision that had nearly caused a family civil war 3 years ago. "Of course. Emma, let's go say hello." The sitting room was filled with Blackwell relatives, all dressed in what they considered casual Friday attire, which meant no ties for the men but still designer labels for everyone. Richard's sister Charlotte was perched on the arm of an antique chair, her husband Greg standing dutifully beside her. Uncle James and Aunt Vivian were deep in conversation with Richard's father, Henry, a stern man whose rare smiles were reserved almost exclusively for his grandchildren, Charlotte's twins. Not that Richard and I had produced any heirs to the Blackwell fortune. "Look who's finally here," Charlotte announced, her voice carrying that same lilting quality as her mother's. We were about to send out a search party. Richard laughed, moving into the room with the ease of someone returning to their natural habitat. I followed more cautiously, accepting air kisses and limp handshakes as we made our way around the room. No one asked me how I was or what I'd been working on. No one cared. "Emma," Henry acknowledged with a nod before immediately turning back to Richard. "Son, did your mother mention the William situation? I could use your perspective." I stood awkwardly for a moment before drifting toward the window, pretending to admire the garden while conversation flowed around me. This was the usual pattern. Richard would be absorbed into family discussions about business, politics, or proper New England society, while I hovered on the periphery, nursing a glass of whatever wine Margaret deemed appropriate for the evening. "Emma, dear," Margaret's voice cut through my thoughts. She'd materialized beside me, a crystal glass of white wine extended in my direction. "Do make yourself useful, and help me bring out the appetizers, would you? Greta has prepared quite the spread, but she's short-handed tonight. Not, would you mind helping? Or, could I ask for your assistance?" Just a thinly veiled command, disguised as a request. Still, I nodded and followed her to the kitchen, where elaborate trays of canapés were laid out on the marble countertop. "The blue trays go on the side table, the silver ones on the coffee table," she instructed, as if speaking to a new hire rather than her daughter-in-law. "And do be careful with the crystal, won't you? It's Waterford." As I carefully lifted the first tray, I heard Charlotte's laughter from the doorway. "Mom's putting you to work already? Better you than me. These little gatherings are always so much effort." Little gatherings, right. Just the immediate family, plus a few cousins and extended relatives, 14 people in total, all watching as I carried out tray after tray, playing the role Margaret had assigned me from day one. The outsider, the helper, the woman who would never quite belong at the Blackwell table even though I sat at it. The dining room of the Blackwell home reminded me of something from a historical drama. All dark wood, heavy curtains, and ancestral portraits watching judgmentally from gilded frames. The massive table could seat 20, though tonight only. 14 places were set with Margaret's prized Royal Doulton china and sterling silver flatware that required special polishing after each use. I'd just finished arranging the last of the appetizer trays when Margaret called everyone to the table. Richard appeared at my side, his cheeks already flushed from scotch and family validation. "There you are," he said, squeezing my arm. "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." "Just helping your mother," I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. There was no point explaining that I'd been visible the entire time, moving between kitchen and dining room while he caught up with his cousins. We took our seats, Richard near his father at one end of the table, me between Aunt Vivian and Richard's cousin Peter, a finance guy who'd never once remembered my name in all the years I'd known him. "So, what was your name again?" Peter asked, on cue, reaching for his wine glass. "Emily?" "Emma," I corrected, the same way I had at Christmas, Thanksgiving, and last summer's garden party. Right. And you do something with computers?" Before I could answer, Margaret tapped her glass with a silver spoon. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for making time in their busy schedules for our little family dinner. The Blackwells have always prioritized family, haven't we?" Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. I took a small sip of water, already counting the minutes until we could leave. "Henry and I are especially pleased that Richard could join us tonight. The firm misses your insights, darling, though of course we respect your independent streak." Her smile tightened slightly, the only acknowledgement of the lingering disapproval of Richard's career change. "And Charlotte, the foundation fundraiser was an absolute triumph. The Winstons couldn't stop raving about your organizational skills." Charlotte preened, smoothing her perfectly highlighted hair. "It was nothing, really. Just a matter of calling in a few favors." Dinner proceeded with the conversation flowing around topics deemed acceptable by Margaret. Real estate values in Beacon Hill, someone's son who'd just been accepted to Harvard. Law, the troubling new construction on the edge of their exclusive neighborhood. I ate quietly, occasionally nodding when someone glanced in my direction. I was just beginning to relax, thinking perhaps tonight wouldn't be so bad after all, when Margaret's voice cut through the dinner chatter. "Emma, would you mind refreshing the wine? And perhaps bring out the second dish of potatoes. I think they're still warming in the oven." All eyes turned to me. Richard looked momentarily confused, then quickly became absorbed in his father's commentary about stock projections. With as much dignity as I could muster, I stood and collected the wine bottles. It wasn't the request itself that bothered me. I was happy to help, honestly. It was the way she asked, the way everyone watched, the unspoken understanding that this was my role. Not quite family, not quite servant, something uncomfortably in between. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter for a moment, gathering myself. Through the swinging door, I could hear laughter, Richard's among them, and felt a surge of something between resentment and loneliness. 7 years, and I was still on the outside. When I returned with the wine and potatoes, the conversation had shifted to Charlotte's twins and their private preschool achievements. I refilled glasses, served the side dish, and returned to my cooling meal. "Oh, and Emma," Margaret called just as I took my seat again. "Aunt Vivian spilled a bit of gravy on the tablecloth. There's a club soda in the bar cart. Would you mind?" The request was so pointed that even Henry looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. I rose again, found the club soda, and carefully dabbed at the small stain near Vivian's plate, while the older woman continued her conversation without acknowledging me. "Thank you, dear," Margaret said when I finished, her tone suggesting she was speaking to a helpful child. "You're so good with these little domestic emergencies." By the time dessert was served, I'd been up from the table 6 times to adjust the thermostat, retrieve a forgotten serving spoon, search for Margaret's reading glasses, which were on top of her head, and help Greta bring in multiple courses. Each request was framed as a favor, each compliance met with that same patronizing gratitude. Richard had noticed, I could tell. Sometimes he'd throw me an apologetic glance or a small shrug, as if to say, "That's just how she is." But he never objected, never offered to help instead, never questioned why his wife had become the evening's unofficial server. As coffee was being poured, Margaret's cousin Elaine accidentally knocked over a nearly empty wine glass, sending the last few drops of red wine onto the carpet. "Oh dear," Elaine fussed, clearly embarrassed. "I'm so clumsy." "Not to worry," Margaret replied smoothly. "Emma will take care of it." That was it. Not a question this time. Not even the pretense of asking for help. Just an assumption, a designation of my purpose in this house. And still, I found myself rising automatically, conditioned after years of these interactions to simply comply. I was on my knees, blotting the carpet with a damp cloth, when I heard it. Charlotte's stage whisper, not quite quiet enough. "Mother, you really should have hired proper help tonight. Using Richard's wife, as the maid is a bit obvious, even for you." Instead of defense or embarrassment, Margaret's response was a light laugh. Well, she might as well make herself useful. It's not as if she contributes much else to the conversation. A few uncomfortable chuckles, a clearing of throats. I kept my eyes down, my hands mechanically working at the stain, though my cheeks burned and my vision blurred slightly. In that moment, I felt utterly alone, kneeling on the expensive carpet of my husband's family home, invisible except when needed for menial tasks. When I finally stood, my knees stiff, the conversation had already moved on. No one looked at me, not even Richard. I slipped into the kitchen with the soiled cloth, taking longer than necessary to rinse it out. When I returned, Greta was bringing out the dessert trays, delicate pastries arranged artfully on silver platters. "I'll take those," Margaret said, rising to her feet. As I moved to sit down, she added, "Emma, the coffee service needs refreshing, and perhaps you could bring out the dessert plates. They're in the cabinet above the dishwasher." I felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, but fracture along already weakened lines. Still, I nodded and headed back to the kitchen, retrieving the plates with mechanical precision. By the time I returned with the heavy tray balanced carefully in my arms, Margaret was standing at the head of the table, tapping her glass again for attention. I paused just inside the doorway, the weight of the tray making my arms tremble slightly. Whatever announcement she was about to make, I could at least set down the dishes first. But Margaret had spotted me, and a slow, calculating smile spread across her perfectly made-up face. "Ah, perfect timing," she said, and I realized with sinking certainty that I was somehow part of whatever she planned to say. "Before we enjoy these wonderful pastries, I'd like us all to acknowledge our little helper this evening." She gestured toward me with her wine glass, all eyes following. "Emma has been so diligent, hasn't she? Almost like having an extra staff member." The room filled with that particular kind of uncomfortable laughter that comes when people aren't sure if they should be laughing at all. Richard shifted in his seat, his expression caught between discomfort and the desire to stay in his mother's good graces. "Come now, Emma," Margaret continued, her voice dripping with false warmth. "You should be grateful I even let you participate tonight. Not everyone gets to serve at a Blackwell family dinner." More laughter, less hesitant this time. And there, it was, the breaking point, reached at last. I stood frozen in the doorway, the heavy tray still in my arms, as Margaret's words hung in the air. Not a daughter-in-law, not family, just the help, unpaid and unappreciated. I don't remember setting the dessert tray down. I must have, because my hands were empty as I stood there, Margaret's words still echoing through the dining room. The laughter that followed felt like tiny daggers, each one finding its mark with precision. Richard had joined in, not loudly, not enthusiastically, but he'd laughed. A small chuckle, quickly hidden behind his napkin, but I'd caught it. After 7 years together, I knew every expression that crossed his face. That laugh hurt more than all of Margaret's barbs combined. "Emma, do sit down," Margaret said, gesturing to my empty chair as if bestowing a great privilege. "You've been so busy, you've hardly touched your meal." I took a mechanical step toward my seat, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed in protest. The heavy silence of humiliation pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. Charlotte was whispering something to her husband. Aunt Vivian was studying her fingernails, and Henry was checking his watch. No one would meet my eyes. That's when I saw it, the flash of headlights through the dining room window, sweeping across the room as a vehicle pulled into the circular driveway. Not the warm yellow of regular headlights, but the cool blue-white of high-end LEDs. I paused, momentarily distracted from my humiliation. "Are we expecting someone else?" Henry asked, frowning at his wife. Margaret shook her head, clearly annoyed at the interruption of her moment. "Certainly not. Probably someone's driver arrived early." But as I watched, the vehicle that came to a stop in front of the house wasn't a town car or a typical chauffeur service. It was a sleek, black Escalade, with tinted windows, government style, the kind used by security details and executive protection. Even from inside, I could see the subtle insignia on the door. Not government, but private sector. "Maybe the Peterson security detail," Charlotte suggested, craning her neck to see. "They've been paranoid since that break-in on Woodland Road." I knew better. The logo on the door was familiar. Too familiar. My pulse quickened as the vehicle's doors opened in perfect synchronization, and 3 men stepped out. Even in the dim evening light, I could see their earpieces, their alert posture, their purposeful movements. Sharp suits, no nonsense. "What on earth?" Margaret murmured, rising slightly from her chair. The men approached the front door with military precision. One glanced up, and for a fleeting second, his eyes seemed to meet mine through the window. I saw recognition there, and something else. Respect. The doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the dining room like a knife. Everyone jumped slightly, the unexpected sound shattering the tension of the moment. "I'll get it," Richard's cousin Peter said, pushing back from the table. "Probably just someone with the wrong address." As Peter disappeared into the foyer, the remaining Blackwells exchanged curious glances. This wasn't part of their carefully orchestrated evening. Unexpected visitors simply didn't arrive at Margaret Blackwell's dinner parties. I heard muffled voices from the entryway, Peter's confused tone rising in question. Then footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Peter returned to the dining room, his face a mask of confusion, followed by all three men from the SUV. They created an imposing presence in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating quiet authority. The man in the center stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Ms. Harrison," he said, using my maiden name with practiced ease. "I apologize for the interruption. We've been trying to reach you, but your personal cell appears to be off." The room went completely still. Every head swiveled between the man and me, trying to process what was happening. I realized I'd turned my phone off at Richard's request. "Family time," he'd called it. "I'm sorry, who exactly are you?" Margaret demanded, her voice sharp with indignation. "And what business do you have barging into my home?" The man didn't even glance in her direction. His focus remained entirely on me, patiently waiting for my response. I recognized him now, Jason Chen, head of our executive security team, which meant, "Boston office has been trying to reach you for the last hour," Jason continued calmly. "The meeting in Dubai has been moved up. Al-Fayed Investments can only guarantee their window for the next 36 hours, and the dev team needs you on site for the final integration." The words hung in the air, incomprehensible to everyone but me. Richard was staring, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Emma, what is this about?" I found my voice at last, startled by how steady it sounded. "What time is Wheels Up?" 90 minutes, Ms. Harrison. The jet is fueled and waiting at Hanscom. We've taken the liberty of having Diane pack your travel case. All the presentation materials have been uploaded to the secure server. Now wait. Just a minute, Richard interrupted, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled. "What jet? What presentation? Emma, what's going on?" For the first time since entering, Jason acknowledged someone else in the room, giving Richard a polite but distant nod. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm afraid this is time-sensitive. Ms. Harrison's presence is required in Dubai immediately." "Dubai?" Charlotte echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. "Emma's going to Dubai? For what possible reason?" I straightened my shoulders, suddenly very aware of the weight that had been pressing down on me all evening, all these years really, starting to lift. "Work," I said simply. "Work?" Richard repeated, as if the concept was entirely foreign. "Your little startup? Emma, this is ridiculous. You can't just leave in the middle of a family dinner because your friend Kate needs help with a website or whatever it is you do." The third security team member, Alicia Garcia, I recalled, stepped forward smoothly. "Sir, Ms. Harrison is the founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies. The Dubai meeting represents a potential $85 million integration contract with Al-Fayed's global financial platform." She said it so matter-of-factly, so professionally, that it took a moment for her words to register with everyone present. When they did, the reaction was immediate. Henry's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Charlotte's mouth fell open inelegantly. Margaret seemed to have turned to stone. "That's not possible," Richard finally managed, looking at me as if seeing a stranger. "Emma works at that little tech company with her college roommate. It's a side project. With all due respect, sir, Jason said. Horizon Technologies employs over 300 people across 4 countries and was recently valued at just under $1 billion. Ms. Harrison's keynote presentation at tomorrow's summit has been in planning for months. I watched the information sink in, saw the dawning realization on their faces. For 7 years, I'd allowed Richard and his family to believe what they wanted about my work. At first, it had been easier that way, avoiding the inevitable criticism, the dismissive comments, the suggestions that I find something more suitable. Then, as Horizon grew, as we secured one contract after another, as my own personal wealth eclipsed that of the entire Blackwell family combined, I'd simply never corrected their assumptions. They hadn't asked. Not once in 7 years had Richard, or anyone in his family, shown genuine interest in what I actually did. "Emma," Richard said, his voice now uncertain. "Is this true?" I nodded slowly. We closed our Series C funding last year. The Dubai contract is the first phase of our expansion into the Middle Eastern market. But you never said anything. You never asked, I replied simply. The words weren't accusatory, just factual. You assumed I was struggling with my little startup, and I let you believe that. Ms. Harrison, the second security team member, David Walsh, interjected gently. The helicopter will be here in 5 minutes to take you to Hanscom. We need to prepare. Helicopter? Peter blurted out, nearly choking on his wine. That's when we all heard it. The distant thrum of rotor blades approaching. Private aviation wasn't unusual in Wellesley, but a midnight helicopter landing on the Blackwells' immaculate lawn certainly was. Margaret finally recovered her voice, rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster. Now see here, this is completely inappropriate. You cannot simply land a helicopter on our property. Without permission. Jason's expression remained professionally neutral. I assure you, Mrs. Blackwell, all necessary permissions have been secured. The temporary helipad lights are being set up as we speak. Sure enough, through the window, I could see more security. Personnel moving across the perfectly manicured lawn, setting up portable lights in a circle to guide the pilot in. Emma, Richard said, moving toward me, his expression a mix of confusion and dawning realization. Why didn't you tell me? All this time. Before I could answer, the security team smoothly moved into formation around me, creating a protective triangle. Jason nodded toward the door. Ms. Harrison, we should proceed. I took a step forward, then paused, looking back at the table, at the family who had never truly seen me. Margaret's face had gone pale, her usual confidence shattered. Richard stood frozen, caught between his family and me, just as he'd always been. The others stared in varying stages of shock and disbelief. For a moment, I considered explaining, telling them about the years of building Horizon from nothing, about the late nights and early mornings, about the pride I felt watching my company grow, about why I'd kept it separate from this part of my life. But they'd had 7 years to ask. 7 years to see me as more than Richard's quiet wife. 7 years to treat me like family rather than help. The helicopter's approach grew louder, drowning out any words I might have spoken. Instead, I simply nodded once, a goodbye of sorts, and turned to follow my security team out the door, leaving the Blackwell family dinner, and perhaps the Blackwell family itself, behind. Walking out of Margaret Blackwell's dining room felt like stepping through a portal into a different dimension. One moment, I was the invisible daughter-in-law. The next, I was surrounded by a security team, striding purposefully toward the front door as a helicopter descended onto the lawn. The transition was so abrupt that I felt almost lightheaded. Richard caught up to us in the foyer, his face flushed with confusion and the beginning stages of anger. Emma, stop. We need to talk about this. Jason and the team paused, looking to me for direction. I nodded slightly, and they stepped back, giving us a moment of privacy, though not too much. They remained within earshot, a silent reminder that I was no longer alone in this house. "What is there to talk about, Richard?" I asked, surprised by how calm I felt. The trembling anxiety that had accompanied me to dinner had vanished, replaced by a strange, serene clarity. "What is there to—" He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times during our marriage. "Emma, you've apparently been running a billion-dollar company without telling me. That seems like something worth discussing." From the dining room doorway, the rest of the Blackwell family watched with undisguised curiosity. Charlotte had her phone out, no doubt already Googling me and Horizon Technologies. Henry stood with his arms crossed, reassessing me with narrowed eyes. And Margaret looked as if someone had just told her the earth was flat. Her worldview had been shattered in an instant. "I never hid it from you," I said quietly. "I use my maiden name professionally, yes, but I've never pretended to be something I'm not. You just never asked the right questions." "That's not fair," Richard protested, lowering his voice. "You let me think, you let my family think, that you worked for some tiny startup. Would it have mattered?" I countered. "Would anything have been different? Would your mother have treated me with respect if she'd known I was worth more than this entire house and everything in it?" He flinched, unable to deny the truth in my words. "That's not the point. The point is that you kept this huge part of your life from me, from us." "Ms. Harrison," Jason interrupted gently, "the helicopter has landed." Through the frosted glass panels of the front door, I could see the distorted glow of the landing lights, feel the vibration of the rotors through the marble floor of the entryway. My world calling me home. "I have to go," I told Richard, taking a step back. "The Dubai deal is crucial." "More crucial than your marriage?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "More important than us?" The question hung between us, weighted with 7 years of history. 7 years of dinners like tonight's, of small humiliations, of Richard standing by while his family whittled away at my dignity bit by bit. 7 years of him never truly seeing me. "That's not fair either," I said softly. "You can't use our marriage as leverage now, not after tonight, not after you laughed." His face fell. "Emma, I didn't mean—" "You did. You all did." I took another step toward the door. "I built Horizon from nothing, Richard. When we met, I was working 20-hour days trying to secure our first round of funding. Kate and I lived on ramen and hope, coding until our eyes blurred. And when you introduced me to your family, when they immediately dismissed me as not good enough, not ambitious enough, not Blackwell enough, do you know what I did?" He shook his head mutely. "I decided to prove them wrong. But not publicly, not for their validation. Just for me. Every condescending comment, every dismissive look, every time your mother treated me like I was insignificant, it fueled me. And when Horizon started taking off, when we secured our first major client, when the valuation hit 8 figures, I realized something important." "What?" he asked, almost whispering. "That I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's, and it was simpler to keep those worlds separate, the Emma who built an empire and the Emma who quietly endured Blackwell family dinners." "But why endure them at all?" Richard pressed. "If you were so successful, why put up with any of it?" The question struck me with unexpected force. Why had I? Why spend 7 years subjecting myself to Margaret's thinly veiled contempt when I could have walked away at any time? The answer came to me with sudden, painful clarity. "Because I loved you," I said simply. "And I thought that eventually it wouldn't matter. That eventually your family would see me for who I really was, or that at the very least you would stand up for me." Richard's shoulders slumped as the weight of my words hit him. Behind him, I could see his family still watching, still listening, still processing the revelation that their outcast daughter-in-law was something entirely different from what they'd assumed. The truth is, I continued, I never needed the Blackwell name or connections or money. I've been financially independent since before we met. But I kept coming to these dinners, kept letting your mother treat me like the help because I was waiting for you to see it. To really see it and to say something, anything. Emma, Ms. Harrison, Alicia cut in. I'm sorry, but we really must depart. I nodded, then turned back to Richard. I have to go. The Dubai presentation has been in the works for months. It could open Horizon to an entirely new market. And then what? He asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. Are you coming back? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't planned beyond escaping the humiliation of the evening. The truth was, I didn't know. After tonight, after finally letting my worlds collide, I wasn't sure what waited on the other side. I don't know, I admitted. I'll be in Dubai for at least a week. After that, I think we both have some reflecting to do. Richard took a step toward me, his hand outstretched. Emma, please, don't leave like this. Not with everything unsaid. Everything has been said, Richard. For 7 years, you just weren't listening. I glanced over his shoulder at Margaret, who stood rigid in the dining room doorway. None of you were. With a final nod to Jason, I turned and walked out the front door into the cool night air. The helicopter waited on the lawn, its rotors stirring the immaculate garden into a frenzy. Portable lights illuminated a makeshift landing zone, and beyond them, curious neighbors had gathered at the edge of the property, drawn by the unusual commotion in the exclusive neighborhood. As we crossed the lawn, I heard footsteps behind us. Turning, I saw Richard following, his dinner jacket flapping in the rotor wash, his expression desperate. At least tell me why, he called over the noise. Why keep it secret all this time? Why not just tell everyone who you really were? I paused, the question resonating deeper than he probably intended. Who I really was. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? For years, I'd compartmentalized myself, the confident CEO in boardrooms, and the acquiescent wife at Blackwell gatherings. I'd allowed Richard and his family to see only what they expected to see, never challenging their assumptions, never demanding recognition for my true self. Because, I called back, the people who truly care about you shouldn't need to be told your worth. They should see it without being shown a balance sheet or a company valuation. The truth of my own words hit me with unexpected force. Maybe I'd been unfair, keeping such a massive part of my life hidden from my husband. But hadn't he been equally unfair, never looking beyond the surface, never questioning the dismissive narrative his family had created about me? Jason guided me toward the helicopter, where the pilot waited with the door open. The noise was deafening. Now, the wind whipping my dress around my legs. Behind me, I could see the Blackwells gathered in the doorway of their perfect colonial home, a tableau of confusion and disbelief, their carefully ordered world turned upside down by the revelation that the woman they'd dismissed for so long had been someone else entirely. As I climbed into the helicopter, I took one final look at Richard standing alone on the lawn, his figure growing smaller as we lifted off. Part of me wanted to tell the pilot to wait, to give Richard a chance to say something, do something, that might change everything. But he just stood there, watching, as I rose above the Blackwell estate, and finally, completely, broke free. The helicopter banked sharply as we rose above the Blackwell estate, giving me one last glimpse of the scene below. The family had spilled out onto the front steps now, their faces upturned and illuminated by the landing lights. Even from this height, I could distinguish Margaret's rigid posture, Charlotte's animated gesturing as she undoubtedly tried to make sense of what had just happened, and Richard, still standing alone on the lawn, growing smaller with each second. Ms. Harrison, are you all right? Alicia asked, handing me a headset so we could communicate over the rotor noise. I slipped it on, grateful for the buffer between me and the world. I'm fine. The words came automatically, a response I'd perfected over years of Blackwell family gatherings. But I wasn't fine. I was experiencing an unsettling mixture of emotions: liberation and loss, vindication and regret, all swirling together like the wind patterns beneath us. For 7 years, I'd kept my professional life separate from my marriage, compartmentalizing with surgical precision. Now, those walls had come crashing down in the most dramatic way possible. "The team briefed me on what happened," Alicia said, carefully. "That couldn't have been easy." I smiled faintly at the understatement. "No, it wasn't. But maybe it was necessary." "For what it's worth," she added, "the way they treated you, it wasn't right." I appreciated her support, but something about it made me uncomfortable. The security team had witnessed my humiliation, seen me treated like a servant in my own family. Former family? I wasn't sure what Richard and I were to each other now. "What's our ETA to Hanscom?" I asked, deliberately changing the subject. 8 minutes. The jet is prepped and waiting. Diane has packed everything you'll need for Dubai, including the presentation materials and your preferred travel attire. Diane, my personal assistant for the past 3 years, had never met Richard. She'd coordinated my entire professional life, my travels, meetings, wardrobe, even my diet during particularly intense work periods, all without ever crossing paths with my husband. The realization struck me as absurd suddenly. How had I maintained such a perfect division? Why had I allowed it to continue for so long? As the helicopter descended toward the private airfield, I caught sight of the Horizon corporate jet waiting on the tarmac, its engines already spooling up. The sight grounded me, reminded me of who I was beyond Richard Blackwell's wife. I was Emma Harrison, founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies. I had built something lasting, something important, something that was entirely mine. The helicopter touched down with barely a bump. As Jason opened the door, the cool night air rushed in, carrying the familiar scent of jet fuel and possibility. A small team waited on the tarmac. Diane, my Chief Operations Officer Miles Chen, and 2 more security personnel. "Emma," Diane called as I stepped onto the tarmac. She was the only one who still called me by my first name at work, a holdover from our college days. "Thank God we found you in time." The Al Fayed team moved up the demonstration because the Sheikh decided to fly to London a day early. "It's fine," I assured her, accepting the garment bag she handed me. "I'm here now." "Are you okay?" she asked more quietly, her eyes scanning my face with the perceptiveness that made her invaluable as an assistant. "The security team said they had to extract you from a family dinner." "It's a long story," I replied, glancing toward the jet. "One that can wait until we're airborne." Miles approached with a tablet in hand, already in briefing mode. "We've uploaded the latest integration specs to your secure server. The dev team made some last-minute adjustments to address the concerns raised during yesterday's call with their CTO. This was my world. Efficient, focused, respectful. No one here treated me like an afterthought or an imposition. No one questioned my competence or worth. Here, I was valued not for who I had married, but for what I had created. As we walked toward the jet, I noticed Diane giving my dress a quizzical look. "I know," I said with a small laugh. "Not exactly board meeting attire." "It's a lovely dress," she replied diplomatically. "But perhaps not ideal for a 14-hour flight. I've packed your usual travel outfit in the bathroom on board." I nodded, gratefully. "You're a lifesaver, as always." We climbed the steps to the jet, the engine's hum vibrating through the metal staircase. Inside, the cabin was prepared for both work and rest. One section set up with monitors and a conference table, another with the lie-flat seat I'd used to catch some sleep during the long journey. As I changed out of my dinner dress into comfortable travel clothes, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different somehow, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, as if a weight had been lifted. The transformation went beyond the change of clothes. It was as if I'd shed an identity I'd been uncomfortably wearing for years. When I emerged, Miles was already setting up for our pre-flight briefing. The team in Dubai has confirmed that all the hardware is in place for the demonstration. Our local rep reports that Al Fayed's technical team is particularly interested in the security architecture. I settled into my seat as the cabin door closed and the jet began to taxi. Through the window, I could see the lights of Boston in the distance, somewhere among them the Blackwell estate, where presumably the family was still trying to process what had happened. What were they saying now? How were they explaining the helicopter, the security team, the revelation that quiet, accommodating Emma was actually the CEO of a billion-dollar tech company? I could almost picture their faces. Margaret's pinched expression as she tried to maintain control of the narrative, Charlotte's barely concealed shock, Henry's calculating reassessment of his son's marriage. And Richard. What was he thinking now? Had he called my cell yet? Left desperate messages I couldn't hear with my phone still turned off? Had he Googled me? Looked up Horizon Technologies? Discovered the interviews and profiles I'd done over the years under my maiden name? Was he feeling betrayed? Or was he finally seeing the truth that had been in front of him all along? The jet accelerated down the runway, pressing me back into my seat. As we lifted off, banking east over the Atlantic, I felt a strange parallel to my departure from the Blackwell dinner. Another ascent, another breaking free. We should go through the presentation one more time, I told Miles, deliberately pushing thoughts of Richard aside. I want to make sure the security protocols are explained in terms their executives can understand, not just their technical team. For the next 3 hours, we worked steadily, refining the presentation, anticipating questions, developing contingency plans. This was the Emma Harrison that the Blackwells had never seen. Focused, decisive, commanding. The woman who had raised $300 million in venture capital, who had gone toe-to-toe with Silicon Valley giants and carved out a unique space in the competitive tech landscape. It was only when Miles finally retired to get some sleep that I allowed myself to think about what I'd left behind. I stared out the window at the darkness below, the occasional ship visible as a tiny point of light on the vast ocean. Somewhere behind us was Boston, Richard, the life I'd been living in parallel to. This one, I wondered if he was awake too, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the wife he thought he knew with the woman who had stepped into a helicopter on his mother's lawn. Had there been signs he'd missed? Conversations where I'd tried to open up but he hadn't heard? Or had I been so determined to keep my world separate that I'd never given him a real chance to understand? My phone sat on the table before me, still powered off. I could turn it on now, check the messages that had undoubtedly piled up. I could call Richard, try to explain. But what would I say? That I was sorry for keeping my success a secret? I wasn't. That I regretted leaving so abruptly? I didn't. The truth was, I wasn't sure what our marriage meant anymore, or if it could survive this revelation. Diane appeared with a cup of tea, setting it beside my tablet. You should get some rest. It's still 9 hours to Dubai, and you'll need to be sharp for the meeting. I know, I sighed, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. I just can't stop thinking about their faces. When Jason said who I really was, it was like watching statues come to life. Do you want to talk about it? She asked, settling into the seat across from me. Sometimes it helps to process these things out loud. I took a sip of tea, the familiar chamomile calming me slightly. It was surreal. For years, they've treated me like I was less than. Richard's mother especially. Tonight was the worst it's ever been. She practically had. Me serving the dinner, wiping up spills, running errands, and Richard just let it happen. Diane's expression darkened. That's awful. No wonder Jason called for the extraction protocol. The what? I looked up, surprised. The extraction protocol, she repeated. It's in your security file. Conditions, under which the team is authorized to remove you from a situation immediately. Jason said it met the criteria. I hadn't realized my security team had such protocols in place. It was touching in a way. They'd recognized a situation harmful to me and acted decisively, more decisively than my own husband ever had. The thing is, I continued, I'm not even angry. I'm just done. Watching their faces when they realized who I really am, what I've built, it wasn't even satisfying. It was just sad. 7 years, and they never once saw me. And now? That was the question, wasn't it? What happened now? The jet cruised at 45,000 feet, carrying me toward a future that suddenly seemed both clearer and more uncertain than ever before. Now I focus on Dubai, I said firmly. The Al Fayed deal is too important to be distracted. After that, I don't know. I need to figure out who Emma Harrison Blackwell really is and what she wants. Diane nodded, understanding in her eyes. For what it's worth, I've always thought Emma Harrison was pretty remarkable on her own. I smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for this part of my life, the part where I was seen and valued for exactly who I was. Thank you for everything tonight. Try to get some sleep, she advised, standing. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. As Diane moved toward her own seat, I reclined mine, staring up at the dimmed cabin ceiling. The faces of the Blackwells still floated in my mind, frozen in disbelief, forced to reckon with the reality that the woman they'd dismissed for so long had been someone entirely different from who they imagined. Someone with power, authority, and a life that had nothing to do with their approval. Whether my marriage would survive this revelation, I didn't know. But as the jet carried me farther from Boston with each passing minute, I realized that I was finally completely free of the weight I'd been carrying. No more pretending to be less than I was. No more silent endurance of casual cruelty. No more waiting for someone else to stand up for me. I closed my eyes, letting the soft hum of the engines lull me toward sleep. Whatever awaited me in Dubai, whatever awaited me when I eventually returned to Boston, I would face it as my complete self, not as Richard's wife or Margaret's daughter-in-law, but as Emma Harrison, undiminished and unafraid. I woke to Diane gently shaking my shoulder, the cabin of the jet bathed in the soft glow of dawn. For a disorienting moment, I didn't remember where I was, or why I was there. Then it all came rushing back. The Blackwell dinner, Margaret's cruelty, the security team's arrival, Richard's confusion, the helicopter, the escape. We're about 90 minutes from Dubai, Diane informed me, setting a fresh cup of coffee on the table beside me. I thought you might want to shower and prepare before we land. I nodded, grateful for her foresight. Thank you. Any updates overnight? Several. She handed me a tablet. Al Fayed confirmed the full board will be present for the demonstration. Their CTO sent over some last-minute questions that Miles has already addressed. And... She hesitated, her expression softening slightly. You've received 17 missed calls and 12 text messages from Richard. My stomach tightened. Of course he'd tried to reach me. I'd left him standing on his mother's lawn with no explanation, beyond a few cryptic sentences exchanged in the heat of the moment. I haven't read them, Diane added quickly, but the notification count appears on your secure phone. The secure phone, the one I used exclusively for Horizon Business, the one Richard didn't even know existed until last night. I'd kept it powered off during the flight, partly to avoid distractions, and partly because I wasn't ready to face whatever Richard had to say. There's also this, Diane continued, pulling up a newsfeed on her tablet. It appears word has gotten out. The headline leapt out at me. Tech billionaire Emma Harrison's dramatic helicopter exit from family dinner stuns Boston elite. Beneath it was a grainy photo taken from a distance. Me climbing into the helicopter on the Blackwell's lawn, security team flanking me, Richard visible in the background. How did this... I began, then realized. The neighbors. Diane nodded. Someone with a smartphone and a Twitter account. It's been picked up by tech blogs and a few business publications. Nothing mainstream yet, but it's spreading. I scrolled through the article, wincing at phrases like mysterious double life and shocked family members. There wasn't much substance, just speculation, and a quote from an unnamed source close to the Blackwell family, claiming surprise at the revelation of my secret career. Perfect timing, I muttered, setting the tablet aside. Just what we need before the Al-Fayed meeting. Actually, Diane said with a hint of satisfaction, their people have seen it too. The Sheikh's assistant mentioned it in this morning's email. Apparently, they're impressed by the dramatic American CEO with the helicopter. It's added a certain mystique. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. So, my family drama is good for business? In this case, yes. Middle Eastern business culture respects power moves and bold gestures. This, she gestured to the article, actually works in our favor. Shaking my head, I rose and headed toward the jet's compact but luxurious bathroom to shower and change. Under the warm spray, I tried to clear my mind of everything except the presentation ahead. The Al-Fayed deal represented a potential expansion into an entirely new market, one that competitors had struggled to penetrate. I needed to be focused, confident, completely present. But as I dressed in the tailored suit Diane had packed, Armani, in a deep midnight blue that complemented my eyes, I couldn't stop thinking about Richard. What had he told his family after I left? How had Margaret reacted once the shock wore off? Was he angry, hurt, confused, or perhaps all three? When I emerged, Miles was waiting with the final version of the presentation displayed on the main cabin screen. I've highlighted the key security protocols they were concerned about. Their technical team has a reputation for asking detailed follow-up questions, so I've prepared supplementary slides for each potential deep dive. Good, I nodded, slipping into CEO mode with practiced ease. Let's run through the demonstration sequence once more. For the next hour, we rehearsed the presentation, fine-tuning language and anticipating objections. This was the Emma I wished the Blackwells could have seen, commanding a room, making split-second decisions, leading a team of brilliant people toward a common goal. Would they have treated me differently if they'd known? Would Richard have stood up for me sooner if he'd understood what I'd built? As the jet began its descent into Dubai International Airport, I gazed out at the city rising from the desert like a futuristic mirage. All gleaming towers and ambitious architecture. A testament to human determination and vision. There was something fitting about making my first appearance as my complete self in this place built on transformation and reinvention. Ms. Harrison, Jason said as the wheels touched down. There will be a car waiting on the tarmac. The hotel is expecting us, and security is already in place for tomorrow's presentation. I nodded, gathering my materials as the jet taxied to a private terminal. Through the window, I could see a sleek black Mercedes waiting beside the runway, surrounded by men in suits despite the desert heat. The Al-Fayed welcoming committee, no doubt. As we prepared to disembark, I made a decision. Taking out my secure phone, I powered it on. Immediately, notifications began flooding in. Richard's calls and texts, emails from colleagues who'd seen the news, messages from friends wondering if I was okay. I ignored them all, opening only the messaging app to send a single text to Richard. I'm safe in Dubai. I need time. We'll talk when I return. It wasn't much, but it was all I could offer right now. I turned the phone off again before he could reply. Whatever conversation we needed to have, it couldn't happen while I was preparing for the most important business presentation of my career. The heat hit me like a physical force as I stepped off the jet. Despite the early hour, the temperature was already climbing toward unbearable. A man in a pristine white dish dasha stepped forward from the waiting delegation. "Ms. Harrison," he greeted me with a slight bow. "I am Khalid Al-Mahmoud, Special Advisor to Sheikh Al-Fayed. It is an honor to welcome you to Dubai. The Sheikh sends his personal regards and looks forward to tomorrow's presentation." "The honor is mine," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for accommodating our adjusted schedule." "Not at all," Khalid smiled. "We understand the demands of running a global enterprise. The helicopter was a nice touch, by the way." I managed to keep my expression neutral, though inside I cringed at the reference to my dramatic exit from the Blackwell estate. News really did travel fast in the digital age. The drive from the airport to our hotel passed in a blur of modern architecture and construction cranes, the city's constant state of becoming reflecting my own internal transformation. I found myself thinking about identities, how we create them, how we hide them, how we reveal them. For years, I'd been two separate people: Emma Harrison, tech CEO, and Emma Blackwell, Richard's accommodating wife. Now those identities had crashed together, and I wasn't sure what remained in the collision's wake. Our hotel suite occupied the entire top floor of one of Dubai's newest luxury towers, offering panoramic views of the city and the Persian Gulf beyond. As the team set up a temporary command center in the living area, I retreated to the master bedroom, finally allowing myself a moment alone. Sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed, I looked out at the alien landscape of Dubai, a city built on ambition and determination, rising improbably from barren sand. There was something poetic about being here at this particular moment in my life, this juncture between what was and what could be. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Emma," Diane called, "there's something you should see." I opened the door to find her holding her tablet, her expression unreadable. "What is it now? More news coverage?" "In a sense. Richard gave an interview." My heart dropped. "He what?" She handed me the tablet, open to a business news site. There was Richard, looking tired but composed, standing outside what appeared to be his office building in Boston. The timestamp indicated the interview had taken place just hours after my departure. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. "Mr. Blackwell," the reporter began, "can you comment on the reports that your wife, Emma Harrison, made a dramatic exit from a family dinner last night?" Richard looked directly into the camera, his expression surprisingly calm. "My wife is the founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies, one of the most innovative companies in the industry. She was called away for an important business meeting in Dubai. That's all there is to say about that. But according to witnesses, she left by helicopter from your mother's lawn, accompanied by a security team. There are suggestions that this was a surprise to your family." Richard's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "My wife's success speaks for itself. If some members of my family were unaware of the full extent of her accomplishments, that's our private matter. What I will say is that Emma Harrison is the most brilliant, dedicated person I've ever known, and I'm incredibly proud to be her husband." The interview ended there, cutting back to the studio anchors who began speculating about the mysterious tech power couple and what this might mean for Horizon's market position. I stared at the screen long after the video ended, trying to process what I'd just heard. Richard had defended me. Publicly. Unequivocally. After 7 years of silent complicity in his family's treatment of me, he'd finally spoken up. Not in the privacy of his mother's dining room, but to the entire world. "There's more," Diane said quietly, taking the tablet and opening another tab. "Your company stock is up 12% since the news broke. The market loves the drama, apparently. And you've received partnership inquiries from 3 new potential clients who say they admire your boldness." I laughed, a slightly hysterical sound even to my own ears. So running away from my in-laws via helicopter is good for business. Who knew? "Emma," Diane said gently, sitting beside me on the bed. "What do you want to do about Richard?" The question caught me off guard, though. It shouldn't have. In the whirlwind of the past 12 hours, I'd barely had time to process my feelings about my husband and our marriage. I don't know, I admitted. He said all the right things in that interview, but it came after you literally flew away from his family on a helicopter, Diane finished for me. Not exactly proactive. Exactly. I sighed, rubbing my temples where a headache was beginning to form. 7 years, Diane. 7 years of dinners like last night's. 7 years of his mother treating me like I was nothing, and he never said a word. People can change, she offered. Maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. Maybe. Or maybe it was too little, too late. I wasn't sure yet. What I did know was that I couldn't go back to the way things were. Couldn't. Return to being two separate Emmas. Couldn't pretend to be less than I was to make the Blackwells comfortable. One thing at a time, I decided, standing up and smoothing my suit. First, we close the Al-Fayed deal. Then I figure out what to do about my marriage. Diane nodded, rising as well. The team is ready whenever you are. We've got about 4 hours before the dinner meeting with Al-Fayed's executive team. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Let's get to work. As we walked back into the suite's living area, I felt a curious sense of peace settling over me. Whatever happened with Richard, whatever the future held for us as a couple, I had reclaimed something essential, my whole self, undivided and unapologetic. I was Emma Harrison, founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies, and I was also Emma Blackwell, a woman who had finally found her voice. The desert sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in golden light. Outside, Dubai continued its relentless expansion, building impossible structures on shifting sands, creating something lasting from the most improbable foundation. Within these glass towers, I would do the same, forge a new future from the broken pieces of the old, constructing something stronger and more authentic than before. I was not running away, I realized. I was running toward wholeness, toward integrity, toward a life where I never again had to make myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. Ready? Miles asked, gesturing toward the presentation, materials laid out on the conference table. I smiled, feeling the weight of pretense finally lifting from my shoulders. More than ready. Let's show them what Horizon can do. As my team gathered around the table, I cast one final glance at the Dubai skyline, a monument to human ambition and the endless possibility of reinvention. Whatever awaited me back in Boston, I would face it on my own terms, as my complete self. That, I decided, was the true meaning of freedom,